In this video, we're going to be discussing the racist history of Christmas before it became the commercialized, gift-giving, cheerful holiday that it is today. The racist past of Christmas does not begin in the colonial era, but it goes all the way back to the 15th century. In the previous video, I discussed how the origins of Christmas trace back to paganism before Europe became Christianized. I discussed how Germanic tribes incorporated their pagan beliefs into this new tradition that Rome were celebrating. So Christmas as we know it today was the merging of these two cultures. But what happened next? In the 1400s, Europe was beginning to find its way out of the Dark Ages after the collapse of Rome. During this time period, this was the golden age of Muslim rule. During this golden age, Islam had found a way to conquer parts of Europe, the Iberian Peninsula to be specific, which is now known as Spain. While there, the Muslims converted some of the Negro and African captives to Islam and recruited some of them to their crusading army. These would become known as the Moors. This also consisted of Hebrews who converted to Islam. Muslim expansion into Europe is what prompted the Church of Rome to declare an holy war on all Islam as well as those who were enemies against Christianity. And the person responsible for issuing this edict was none other than Pope Nicholas V. It is through Christianity, or at least a redefined Christianity, that Europe will begin its rise to prominence on the world stage. And that is the reason why a majority of the world now celebrates Christmas. But how did racism factor into all of this? When the Roman Catholics began to conquer Spain from the Muslims, they began to convert the Black Moors to Catholicism, or else they had to be exiled. Those converted were called Moriscos. They became the servants of the Europeans. They were also called conversos, and these were Hebrews who had dwelt in Spain for a long period of time before the Muslims even arrived. However, some of this information is not taught to us in school, so I do recommend that you watch my previous video called Black People in Medieval Europe. Now, to go back to how this all relates to Christmas, the Spaniard Catholics were already into the pagan traditions that most of Europe was into at the time. But it was during the time of the Reconquista that they introduced a man called Sinterklaas to the world. Santa Claus is derived from Sinterklaas. The Spaniards also referred to him as Saint Nicholas, as he was shown wearing red as well as a cross on top of his hat. However, in the original Spanish tradition, Santa or Sinterklaas is often associated with someone wearing blackface. Here's why that is. Now remember how Pope Nicholas signed the Papal Bull Edict in 1452, which allowed these black Jews to become their slave property? Well, the Dutch ended up coming with a pretty interesting tradition that most of the world still follows today, and it seems to reflect upon that Papal Bull Edict of 1452, as the main figure of this tradition just so happens to have the name Nicholas, or Nick for short, as we know him as Saint Nick. In today's time, we call him Santa Claus, but back then he was known as Saint Nick, and Santa's original helpers were not elves, but black people. Now, this tradition we now know as Christmas dates back even further than before black people became servants or slaves. Remember, Europeans at the time were pagans for centuries. So in the old custom, Santa Claus would be the replacement of Krampus, who was known as the devil. This was only due to Europe becoming Christianized by Rome. But instead of completely getting rid of their old customs, they combined it with elements of Christianity to conceal the fact that it is still rooted in paganism. And this can be said for all the holidays that Western civilization partakes in. New Year's, Easter, Christmas, even Halloween all have pagan roots. But as far as Christmas, Saint Nicholas, which we now know as Santa, became the face of this tradition, while Krampus, the devil, will become his companion. But following the 15th century, it will be black people taking the role of Krampus, the devil, becoming the companions or servants of Saint Nicholas. So this black servant was known as Werte Piet, which means Black Pete. He became the companion of Saint Nicholas in folklore. And history shows that Black Pete was depicted as a black Moor.
Wees maar gerust, mijn kind, ik ben een goede vriend. Want dan ben ik zwart als roet, ik meen het toch goed.
I must say, looking at it from my girlfriend, it's a bit different. She looks still very nice.
We're a different couple, but still the same
Black
person.
couple.
Yeah.
So as you can see, even up until this day, it is still tradition for Europeans to dress in blackface to mock black people. They even mocked biblical figures in the Bible, such as the three wise men who visited Yeshua, the Messiah, when he was a baby. And this mockery would carry over into different parts of Western civilization. There's a recent photo of a princess wearing a blackamoor brooch, which dates back to the 1600s. Europeans thought it was fashionable to have black servants during the time. So many of these blackamoor decorations were sold to be placed inside European establishments. They could still be found online if you're interested in seeing what they look like. But this is just further proof that black people were in Europe and they was depicted as being Moors. Even in Sardinia, Italy, they have the flag with the heads of 4 black Moors. And in between these decapitated heads, they place the Roman cross. In modern times, there are still Gentile nations who celebrate a tradition that enslaved millions of black people, in which many were raped, tortured, and killed by their ancestors.
Esta tradición que creemos que a los ojos de la diversidad en este país es absolutamente nefasta para nuestros hijos racializados que han nacido también en este país y que necesitan, ¿no?, ser reforzados en su empoderamiento, y lo que hace esta costumbre es desempoderarlo.
Parar. Bueno, no lo vas a intentar. Vale, lo que podamos. Vale. Ya, si puedes, ya avisa al rey.
Bueno, realmente la polémica vendrá desde fuera, porque para la gente de Alcoy, y creo que para la gente de aquí no hay ninguna polémica, porque los pajes lo que representan es un ser mágico y no tiene nada que ver con ningún aspecto racial.
Por mucho que se insista en que es una cuestión que no tiene nada que ver con el racismo, sí tiene que ver con el racismo, porque nuestra piel no es ningún divertimento.
Muy emocionante. Es horrible. Me va a llorar. Tomasa, bienvenida, ¿cómo estás?
During the colonial era, holidays was the perfect time for slaves to run away from their oppressors. During holidays such as Christmas, slave masters were more lenient towards their slaves because they were distracted by the celebrations with their own family. However, this provided only a temporary relief for the slaves, as the slave owners did not morally change after the holidays ended. Things went right back to the regular scheduled program, and slavery was still just as brutal as it was before the holidays began. So holidays such as Christmas was the perfect opportunity for slaves to flee from their oppressors. And I must also mention the further disdain that these Christian slave owners had towards their enslaved. They would feed them the less desirable parts of the pig during these festivities, such as the pig's feet as well as the intestines, which is now known as chitlins. While historically it was culturally acceptable for Europeans, even the Greeks and Romans, to eat the pig, for people like the Hebrews, it was socially unacceptable and against their laws. It is highly probable that these slaves would have never ate such foods if they were not under the bondage that they were in. The same can be said for these pagan holidays that the Christians have imposed upon us. But as the descendants of slaves, we are no longer under their yoke physically. We can now set ourselves free from their ways and customs. Deuteronomy chapter 4 verse 40 says, "You should keep therefore his statutes, his commandments, which I command you this day, that it may go well with you and with your children after you, that you may prolong your days upon the earth, which the Most High Yahuah has given thee forever."